Welcome to today's historical deep dive. Imagine a world where the very idea of power is being reinvented, where the echo of guillotines hasn't faded, but a new throne is being built. This isn't just history. It's a psychological thriller played out on the grandest stage. The man at the center of it all? Napoleon Bonaparte. A name that still electrifies the air, synonymous with genius, ambition, and ultimate downfall. How does a nobody from a remote island rise to command Europe? And what dark currents flow beneath the surface of such monumental ambition? We're about to peel back the layers to understand the why behind the conquests, the laws, the crowns. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin and change the way you think about history. You stand in Paris, December 1st, 1804. The city breathes with a nervous energy, a dissonant symphony of awe and unease. Scaffolding clings to Notre Dame Cathedral like a parasitic vine, obscuring the ancient stone face as workers rush to prepare for an event unprecedented in France since the Revolution severed the heads and the divine right of kings. Banners hang limp in the biting cold air, trumpets rehearse triumphant fanfare, and the very cobblestones beneath your boots seem to vibrate with the impossible weight of expectation. This isn't merely a coronation. It is an invention, a deliberate act of will imposing itself upon the fabric of reality. A republic, forged in the bloody crucible of revolution and radical ideals, is about to place a crown upon the head of an emperor. How did you, Napoleon Bonaparte, First Consul of France, arrive at this audacious precipice? It wasn't just military victory and sheer momentum that brought you here. It was a calculated, almost cold understanding that raw power, however absolute, is a fragile, fleeting thing without the heavy, symbolic weight of legitimacy, without the cloak of tradition a crown provides. You had climbed every precarious rung through sheer force of will, undeniable military genius, and relentless political cunning. First, a nobody Corsican officer, an outsider speaking French with a thick accent. Then the unexpected hero of Italy, the man who reshaped maps, the conqueror of Egypt, or perhaps the man who marketed his time in Egypt as a conquest despite its chaotic reality. The man who seized power in a swift coup, the 18 Brumaire. The First Consul, who then stabilized a nation bleeding from internal strife, rewriting laws, centralizing authority, building roads and institutions. But Consul felt temporary, vulnerable, a title voted upon, a position granted by the fickle will of politicians, something that could theoretically be voted away. The Bourbon kings, for all their spectacular failings, had the weight of centuries behind them, the perceived divine right woven into the nation's consciousness. The Republic had the chaotic legitimacy of the people's will, constantly shifting like a Paris mob, prone to faction and upheaval. You craved permanence. You yearned for a dynasty that would outlast your own breath, a legacy not just of conquest, but of fundamental change, solidified. You saw clearly that the ultimate authority isn't just taken by force, it must be seen to be given, even if you are the one pulling the strings, choreographing the moment. And so, you orchestrated this grand spectacle, this audacious fusion of revolutionary ambition and monarchical theater. You invited the Pope, a shrewd nod to ancient tradition and a powerful symbol of European legitimacy. Yet, You plan to control the narrative, the very moment of anointing, perhaps even placing the crown upon your own head. This isn't just about the physical act of putting a crown on your head. It's about forging a new reality, declaring to France and to all of Europe that the age of uncertainty, of shifting governments and radical instability is definitively over. You will be emperor. And this, standing here on the eve of coronation, is where the true, treacherous path of empire begins. The silence before the storm, the collective breath held by millions across the continent as you prepare to step onto a stage you meticulously built, where history itself is the audience and your entire legacy hangs precariously in the balance. Was this a necessary act of stabilization? A desperate move to cement fragile gains and prevent a return to chaos? Or the first irreversible step of a dictator shedding the pretense of republicanism to consolidate absolute power? You understand, perhaps better than anyone, that while battles are won by force of arms, empires are built on perception, on the stories you tell the world, and ultimately, yourself. You ride through the streets of Paris towards Notre Dame on that cold December morning. The air bites, sharp and clean, cutting through the thick scent of incense and damp wool cloaks that rises from the immense crowds. It's a sea of faces, stretching as far as the eye can see, gazing up at you, the man who now embodies their triumphs, their fears, their hopes. Your carriage, a rolling palace of gilt and glass, is pulled by 8 magnificent gray horses, their breath pluming in the frigid air. As you pass beneath triumphal arches erected just for this day, symbols that mimic the Caesars you so admired, you feel the weight of history and the gaze of thousands. This procession isn't merely a journey. It's a deliberate display, a calculated performance designed to awe and subdue. You observe the expressions, some faces alight with fervent cheering, others watching silently, assessing, calculating in turn. They remember the lavish processions of the Bourbon kings, the chaotic, passionate parades of the Revolution, and now this, something new, yet strangely familiar in its deliberate grandeur. It is a moment of colossal transition made manifest in movement. A shift in the very fabric of power played out on cobblestone streets. The insight crystallizes in your mind. Leadership isn't just about issuing decrees from a palace or commanding armies in battle. It is profoundly about presence, about spectacle, about embedding your authority not just in law, but in the collective imagination. It's about making the populace feel part of something larger than themselves. A grand narrative unfolding before their eyes, even as you consolidate all power unto yourself. This journey to Notre Dame isn't just to be crowned, it is to be seen being crowned, to etch the image of the emperor into the soul of France. Power, you understand with chilling clarity, needs pageantry. It needs symbols, rituals, and elaborate performances to embed itself deep within the collective consciousness, to feel inevitable and sacred. It's a surprising truth in this age that prides itself on reason and revolution. Yet here you are, wrapping yourself in the ancient robes of emperors, leveraging the same need for myth and ceremony that held sway millennia ago. It remains a potent tool, wielded by those who truly understand the human heart's deep, often unconscious desire for order and hierarchy, sometimes even willingly sacrificing liberty for the comforting structure of authority. Ask yourself, is this pragmatic genius leveraging timeless human psychology for stability? Or is it the beginning of the fatal delusion, mistaking the performance for the substance of power. What would you have done, standing in his ornate, oversized boots, feeling the gaze of an empire upon you? This day, this procession, is a living lesson. The most powerful scepter might not be made of gold, but of symbolism, carefully constructed and brilliantly deployed. It underscores a central, often overlooked truth about power. Its grip is often strongest when it feels like destiny, woven into the spectacle of life itself. You step inside the vast, echoing space of Notre Dame Cathedral. Centuries of French monarchs have been crowned within these walls, their divine right seemingly consecrated by the sheer weight of stone and ritual. The air is thick, heavy with incense and history, a palpable force pressing down. Yet, you feel no humility here. This isn't a place of worship for you today. It's a stage, a colossal, sacred stage erected not for deference to the divine, but for the grandest performance of your life. The Pope, Pius VII, is here, a small, pale figure almost swallowed by the grandeur he represents. He is the symbol of an older power, a spiritual authority you respect just enough to leverage, but certainly not to obey. Cardinals, bishops, and dignitaries fill the immense nave, their vibrant, elaborate robes a startling contrast against the ancient gray stone walls, a splash of color in a tableau of power. You see Josephine, adorned in dazzling jewels, playing her part, her face a mask of regal composure. Every hushed whisper, every sidelong glance, every carefully orchestrated movement is amplified in this hallowed setting, projected outward to an audience far beyond these walls. God, history, and every rival, every potential challenger watching from the shadows of Paris and Europe. This moment, this audacious co-option of the most sacred space in France, is a stark illustration of ambition's absolute power. You didn't just occupy a position of power, you redefined the very ritual designed to bestow divine legitimacy. You are taking a space built for God's representatives and bending it entirely to your secular, self-made will. The ultimate symbol of spiritual authority is present, but you will place the crown upon your own head. It is a profound act of self-coronation, a direct visual statement that your authority comes not from inherited right or divine mandate, but from your own strength, your own will. Here lies a deeper insight. True power brokers don't just inhabit positions. They seize, reshape, and utterly redefine the spaces and rituals that confer that power. The coronation ritual wasn't performed for you. You performed it through it, twisting its ancient meaning into a declaration of your own sovereignty. Consider the tragic irony. The Church, a symbol of eternal principles and humility before the divine, becomes the backdrop for perhaps the greatest single act of earthly pride and ambition in centuries. It is a chilling reminder that even the most powerful symbols of faith can be co-opted, reduced to mere props in the relentless pursuit of worldly dominion. Ask yourself, standing here, in the shadow of Notre Dame's vastness, with the weight of history and the gaze of Europe upon you, was this moment an act of securing your reign? Or did it plant the first subtle seed of your eventual downfall, the point where ambition began to blind you? The moment arrives within the hallowed, echoing nave of Notre Dame. The air is thick with incense and anticipation, a palpable weight pressing down on the assembled dignitaries. Pope Pius VII, robed in gold and white, stands before you, the ancient regalia spread out. He blesses the heavy, gem-encrusted crown, performing a role centuries old, steeped in divine right and papal authority. This is tradition, solidified into ritual, meant to underscore the monarch's connection to God through the Church. But you, Napoleon Bonaparte, stand not as a supplicant receiving grace, but as a force of nature arriving at his destiny. As Pius VII, a man who has traveled from Rome for this moment, reaches for the crown, the very symbol of legitimate power in Europe, your hand moves. It is swift, decisive, unexpected by many, perhaps even by the Pope himself in that precise second. Your fingers close around the cold, solid gold of the crown, your grip firm. You have taken it. It has not been bestowed. All eyes are on you as you lift the crown yourself, its weight a physical manifestation of the burden and the triumph you now assume. You turn slowly, not to the Pope, but towards the high altar, towards the historical weight of France, towards the empire you have forged in fire and blood. And then, with a gesture of supreme, audacious self-belief, you place the crown firmly upon your own head. A collective breath seems to catch, held captive by the sheer audacity of the act. Was that a gasp of shock, or the silent, awed acknowledgement of a prophecy fulfilled? This single, defiant movement shatters centuries of precedent. You have not been crowned by the Church, as French kings had been since Pepin the Short. You have not claimed the Bourbons' mantle of divine right, a power flowing downwards from heaven. You have declared that your legitimacy stems from a different source entirely, from you, from your intellect, your will, your military genius, the loyalty of your army, and the destiny you believe you command. This wasn't spontaneous theater. It was a calculated, revolutionary statement. It was Napoleon telling the world, and perhaps even the Pope, that he knelt to no earthly or heavenly power for his authority. He was the architect of his own fate, the ultimate self-made emperor. It was a direct challenge to every established source of European power: monarchical lineage, aristocratic privilege, ecclesiastical sanction. He wrote his own narrative in gold and precious stones, defying the established script to stake his claim. Ask yourself, is this the ultimate expression of a leader who understands that power is taken, not given? Or is it the first tremor of a hubris that would ultimately blind him? This moment reveals a profound, sometimes terrifying truth about legitimacy. It is often a story that is told, enforced, and sometimes, in moments of radical upheaval, rewritten by the boldest players. While tradition offers the comfort of continuity and perceived stability, breaking it with undeniable force can forge a new, potent form of legitimacy, one built entirely on force of personality and audacious self-belief, for better or worse. You have just placed the crown, heavy with history and ambition, upon your own head. The vaulted ceiling of Notre Dame echoes the gasps and whispers of the assembled elite, those who support you, those who fear you, and those who secretly resent you. But the act is not complete. You turn, your gaze sweeping across the vast space until it settles on a lone figure kneeling on a cushion nearby. It is Josephine de Beauharnais, the woman who has been by your side through the ascent, the storms, and the improbable triumphs. With a deliberate, measured pace, you walk towards her. The weight of the emperor's robe feels less like fabric and more like destiny now. She kneels, her head bowed, a picture of submission and anticipation. This moment, often portrayed as a tender gesture in the midst of power, is in fact a stroke of political genius, as cold and calculated as any battlefield maneuver. You take a smaller, yet still ornate diadem and lift it. Your movements are not those of a loving husband bestowing a gift, but of a monarch solidifying his reign. As you place the crown upon her head, the words ring out, declaring her empress. This single act serves multiple critical functions. You are not merely acknowledging your wife. You are performing a strategic ritual designed to anchor your revolutionary emperorship to something resembling tradition and lineage. Josephine, while not of royal blood, moved in the upper echelons of the Ancien Regime society. Her connections, her social standing, provided a fragile yet valuable bridge to the world you had overthrown, but whose acceptance you now, paradoxically, required. By crowning her, you are not just creating an empress, you are manufacturing the appearance of a dynastic structure, a stable royal household that implies continuity and legitimacy. You are telling France, and indeed Europe, that this new empire is not a temporary aberration, but a permanent fixture, complete with the ceremonial trappings of power they understood. It's a masterclass in using the symbols of the past to validate the realities of the present. The deeper insight here is stark. For figures operating at this pinnacle of power, personal relationships are rarely just personal. They are woven into the intricate tapestry of political ambition. Josephine becomes a piece on the chessboard, elevated not purely out of affection, but because her elevation serves a strategic purpose. She adds a layer of necessary decorum and perceived stability to your audacious claim. It is a reminder that those who chase absolute power often see every significant bond, every intimate connection, through the lens of political utility. Reflect on this. Can true intimacy or vulnerability survive when every interaction, every public gesture, including the crowning of your own spouse, is a calculated move? What would it mean to live a life where the person closest to you is also a vital part of your grand strategy? It speaks to the profound, almost terrifying isolation of ultimate authority, where even love can become a tool for building an empire. And yet, beneath the cold strategy, perhaps there is a sliver of genuine sentiment. The world watches, but only you know the true blend of ambition and affection in that moment. The air inside Notre Dame on December 2nd, 1804, is thick with the scent of incense and the weight of history. Centuries of tradition, of kings anointed by the Church, hang heavy in the vast space. Pope Pius VII is here, a symbol of ancient authority, waiting to perform the sacred rite. But you are not a king bound by the past. The crown of emperor, heavy with the echoes of Rome and Charlemagne, rests nearby. The moment arrives. You step forward, not to kneel before the pontiff, but to stand as the central figure. The expectation is palpable. The Pope will place the crown. But that is not your plan. With a deliberate, powerful gesture, you reach out, take the laurel wreath of gold from the cushion, and raise it yourself. For a beat that feels like eternity, you hold it aloft, acknowledging its weight, its meaning. Then you place it firmly upon your own head. A collective breath seems to hold in the cathedral. Then you turn to Josephine, kneeling before you, and crown her empress. This act, this breathtaking departure from millennium-old custom, isn't merely a flourish of ego. It is a fundamental declaration of sovereignty. By taking the crown from the altar and placing it upon yourself, you make it clear Your power is not derived from God via the Pope, not from inherited royal blood, but from yourself, from your triumphs, your will, and ostensibly from the French people who affirmed your rule through a plebiscite, however manipulated. You have snatched the very symbol of ultimate authority and declared its source to be internal, forged in the fires of revolution and conquest, not bestowed from above. You become not just Emperor of France, a proprietary title over a kingdom, but Emperor of the French. This distinction is subtle yet seismic. You rule for the nation, for its people, a concept born from the very revolution that overthrew the old order. Here's the political alchemy. You blend the venerable, awe-inspiring title of emperor with its deep roots in European history, with the modern, radical idea of national sovereignty and leadership legitimized by the nation's will. You take the oldest form of power and infuse it with the newest source of legitimacy. It's a synthesis of absolute authority and popular mandate, a beast the world had never quite seen before. This self-coronation is nothing short of a masterclass in political messaging. You invited the Pope, respecting tradition just enough to cloak your ascent in its visual splendor and borrow its historical authority, lending gravity to your new title. Yet, in the decisive moment, you shatter the very premise of that tradition, that ultimate power flows from the divine. Mediated by the Church, you perform the ritual, yet simultaneously dismantle its most sacred element. It is a move that acknowledges history while declaring independence from it. Consider the sheer audacity. To stand before the representative of God on earth, in the spiritual heart of a continent steeped in religious authority, and essentially say, "My power comes from me." It redefined the very landscape of European power dynamics in a single, unforgettable gesture. The insight here is profound. True political genius often lies not in choosing between old and new, but in synthesizing disparate ideas, combining old forms with new realities to create a unique, powerful synthesis of authority that is simultaneously familiar and revolutionary. Ask yourself, was this brilliance, recognizing the shifting sands of power and adapting, or simply hubris in its purest form, a public declaration of self-worship? What does it take to redefine legitimacy itself? This moment reveals a leader who doesn't just adopt existing models of power. He innovates the very definition of leadership, leaving his own indelible, almost defiant stamp on how authority is perceived and exercised, echoing the storm you unleashed upon the world. News of your coronation doesn't just travel, it erupts across Europe like a seismic shockwave. The very air crackles with the shift in power. In Paris, the gilded halls of the Tuileries now house an emperor, a spectacle that sends shivers down the spines of those who remember the guillotines and the cries for a republic. Many veterans, scarred by battles fought under the tricolor banner for liberty, equality, fraternity, feel a profound, chilling betrayal. They look upon the shimmering silks, the bowing courtiers, and the newly minted dukes and counts, titles you have created, elevating marshals and ministers to the ranks of nobility, and see their sacrifices mocked. The ideals they bled for, the very soul of the revolution, seem to have been traded for ermine and a crown. It's a bitter irony. The man who rose from the ashes of the monarchy now rebuilds it, albeit in his own image. Yet others in France, weary to their bones from years of revolution and instability, breathe a sigh of relief. They see not betrayal, but a strong hand finally gripping the reins of a chaotic nation. They welcome the promise of order, of a predictable future, even if the price is autocratic rule. Your coronation is for them the anchor the ship of state desperately needed, even if it means discarding the revolutionary compass. This internal division is subtle, simmering beneath the surface of enforced loyalty, a quiet counterpoint to the thunderous pronouncements of the new empire. It's a reminder that even absolute power struggles to homogenize the complex tapestry of public opinion. Across the borders, the reaction is far less nuanced, far more visceral. The ancient monarchies, Vienna, Berlin, St. Petersburg, London, recoil in collective horror and outrage. They saw you as a dangerous general, yes, a formidable consul, certainly. But an emperor? This is an act of unimaginable audacity, a defiant punch thrown at the face of divine right and hereditary rule. You are no longer just a powerful adversary. You are a rival emperor, a dangerous precedent, the Corsican upstart, legitimizing himself through sheer force of will and military might, not bloodline. This challenges the very foundation of their authority, the centuries-old legitimacy they cling to. The crowned heads of Europe perceive your ascension not merely as a power grab, but as a direct threat to the established order, a cancerous growth of revolutionary ambition on the body of the continent. The response is swift and predictable. Diplomatic channels hum with urgent dispatches. Old rivalries are momentarily set aside. Austria, smarting from previous defeats. Prussia, wary of your expansion. Russia, under the ambitious Tsar Alexander I. And most crucially, Britain, ever the naval powerhouse, fearing your dominance. They begin to solidify tentative alliances. The Third Coalition starts to take shape, a gathering storm on the horizon, fueled by fear, indignation, and the absolute refusal to accept your imperial title. Your move to consolidate power internally, to provide stability and legitimacy for your rule in France, has inevitably created a ripple effect of friction externally. The existing powers perceive the shift not just as your gain, but as their potential loss, a threat to their own security and influence on the global chessboard. Consider this: any dramatic assertion of authority, while perhaps stabilizing domestically in the short term, often unleashes forces of opposition on a larger stage. Power vacuums and shifts are rarely tolerated quietly by those who already hold sway. What would you have done, standing in his boots, knowing internal triumph might unleash external war? The velvet is soft against your brow, the gold heavy, the cheers echoing the sound of shackles tightening. You wear the crown now. The title is emperor, but the weight is immense, not just in ounces of metal, but in the crushing pressure of an empire you must hold together, alone, at the very pinnacle. Being emperor isn't a reward. It's a relentless, all-consuming duty. The glittering ceremonies fade, replaced by endless hours hunched over maps and documents, a prisoner of paperwork in a palace built for kings. You throw yourself into the machine of state with manic energy. Administration, reorganization. It's a whirlwind of decrees and directives. This era is defined not just by canons, but by code. You push, cajole, dominate the creation of the civil code, the Code Napoleon. It's your enduring civil legacy, an attempt to rationalize and unify the messy patchwork of French law, echoing Roman principles but stamped with your absolute will. You oversee infrastructure projects, canals, roads, bridges, binding the empire together physically as you attempt to bind it politically and legally. You are the architect, the foreman, the surveyor, all at once. Every detail crosses your desk. Every decision rests on your shoulders. There is no delegation of the ultimate burden. And beneath the veneer of civil order, the drums of war beat ceaselessly. Being emperor means preparing for the inevitable challenges. The other crowns of Europe watch with envy and fear. You must project an image of unwavering strength, an unshakable certainty that allows no room for doubt, especially not in the eyes of your marshals, your ministers, or the restless populace. You become a performance artist on the grandest stage, playing the role of the infallible, indefatigable sovereign. The private man, the introspective Corsican, must be suppressed, perhaps even extinguished. You are the keystone of this vast, precarious edifice, and if you waver, the whole structure could collapse. It's a life of constant vigilance, a self-imposed isolation at the very top, trading personal peace for ultimate control. The chilling insight is this: the acquisition of supreme power doesn't bring ease or freedom. It brings a new, heavier set of burdens and responsibilities. A relentless demand for performance and an almost pathological need for control. You wanted to rule the world, or at least a significant part of it. Now you find that to maintain that rule, you must sacrifice the quiet moments, the spontaneity, perhaps even parts of your own soul. It is the ultimate tragic irony, achieving everything only to find you must give everything to keep it. Ask yourself, is this the price of greatness or the trap of ambition? What would you have been willing to surrender to wear that crown? Be careful what you wish for in the pursuit of ultimate authority. The view from the top might be grand, but the pressure to remain there can be soul-crushing, requiring the constant sacrifice of personal peace and spontaneity. You look out across a map of Europe, but it's no longer just nations. It's a vast, shifting chessboard, and you are moving the pieces with ruthless intent. Your empire is not confined to the borders of France. It is a sprawling, interconnected web. Annexed territories absorbed into the core, allied states bound by treaty and threat, and most distinctively, a network of satellite kingdoms ruled by your own blood. You traveled to Milan Cathedral and, in a conscious echo of Charlemagne, crowned yourself King of Italy, placing the Iron Crown upon your own head. Your brother Joseph, a reluctant sovereign, is seated on the turbulent throne of Naples. Louis, your brother, is installed as King of Holland, struggling with the Dutch spirit of independence. Jerome, the youngest and most impulsive, governs the new kingdom of Westphalia. Your sisters are strategically married into the old royal houses of Europe, weaving threads of Bonaparte legitimacy into the ancient tapestry. This is the imperial project in full bloom, an audacious attempt to redefine the continent's power structure, to extend French influence like an inescapable shadow, to secure your borders by pushing them ever outward, and critically, to starve and isolate your greatest foe, Britain, through the continental system. Each new crown, each new annexation, each enforced alliance demands not just initial military conquest, but constant political maneuvering, tireless administration, and the ever-present threat of force. You are no longer merely managing a nation. You are attempting to micromanage a continent, bending its diverse peoples and ancient resentments to your singular will. This relentless expansion is driven by a deep-seated need to validate and secure the imperial title you seized, to protect the gains of the revolution as interpreted by you. Yet, this very expansion, built on the subjugation of others and the imposition of French dominance, sows seeds of profound resentment and burgeoning national resistance across Europe. It is a paradox. The drive to create absolute security through domination inherently generates new, bitter enemies. The insight here is stark. Power rarely finds rest. It constantly expands, seeking to secure itself by overwhelming its surroundings, frequently leading to dangerous overextension and the creation of the very threats it seeks to eliminate. Ask yourself, is this the ultimate expression of strategic genius or the fatal flaw of unchecked ambition? The reflection is sobering. The grand ambition to build an empire, often rationalized as bringing order, efficiency, or civilization, too frequently results in the brutal subjugation of other peoples, stripping them of their autonomy and dignity. And in that act of subjugation lies the fertile ground for the very resistance and rebellion that can ultimately lead to the empire's and the emperor's downfall. You build a magnificent, fragile structure of crowns and treaties, believing it immutable, unaware that the weight of it is crushing the spirit of a continent that will one day rise. The imperial machine hums, a marvel of your own making, stretching across Europe. You sit atop it, undisputed, but the silence in the nursery is a gnawing void. The crown rests securely on your head and upon Josephine's, but there is no small hand to reach for it, no heir to inherit this staggering creation. An empire built on sheer will, on lightning campaigns and political artistry, feels fragile, temporary, without the anchor of a dynasty. Advisors, generals, ministers, their whispers are polite, respectful, but their eyes ask the question, what happens when you are gone? This revolutionary project demands legitimacy. And in the eyes of the old world, and even many of your own people, that means blood succession. The pressure mounts, a silent, relentless force. It's not just about a child. It's about the future, the stability, the very survival of the edifice you've raised, stone by stone. Josephine, your companion through the improbable rise, the woman who shared the lean years and the dizzying heights, cannot provide this keystone. And so, you confront the agonizing calculus. Affection, shared history, personal loyalty, weighed against the perceived needs of millions, the future of Europe, your immortal legacy. The scene unfolds in the Tuileries Palace, draped in formality, yet thick with unspoken pain. The formal declaration, the shared tears, a public spectacle of a private agony. You sacrifice the heart of your home for the health of the state. This isn't just a divorce. It's a king dismantling his personal life for the perceived good of his kingdom. It's a chilling demonstration of how power, absolute power, can dissect and discard human connection. Then comes the strategic remarriage. Not for love, though perhaps you hoped for companionship, but for lineage, for legitimacy. The choice falls upon Marie-Louise, Archduchess of Austria, daughter of Emperor Francis I, niece of the ill-fated Marie Antoinette. There's a cruel, almost theatrical irony in this. The revolutionary parvenu, marrying into the very bloodline his revolution overthrew, seeking validation from the ancient regimes he conquered. It's a masterstroke of realpolitik, securing a temporary alliance with a major power and, more importantly, offering the promise of that vital missing piece, an heir. This isn't a decision made in the heat of battle. It's a cold, calculated necessity. You trade the warmth of affection for the cold certainty of lineage. The imperial imperative overrides personal bonds, revealing the isolation at the apex of power. The higher the stakes, the colder the calculations become. Personal relationships are often sacrificed on the altar of political expediency, a brutal reminder of the compromises demanded by absolute rule. What does it cost the man to make such a choice? And what does it tell us about the nature of the power he wielded and the legacy he sought to forge? You place the heavy crown upon your own head. The silence in Notre Dame is deafening, thick with history and expectation. This is it, the ultimate act of control, solidifying the revolution's gains, ending the endless cycle of coups and threats. You are emperor now, not for yourself, you tell yourself, but for France, to bring the stability that has eluded this nation for a decade. You build a court, create a new nobility, establish a dynasty. This is the structure, the permanence you crave. Yet the very act designed to secure your rule through ultimate authority becomes the engine of perpetual conflict. The paradox is immediate, crushing. You are emperor, yes, but not by divine right or ancient lineage. Your title is forged in the crucible of battle, legitimized by the blood and sacrifice of soldiers under your command. The old monarchies across Europe despise you, fear the revolutionary energy you embody, even as you wear imperial robes. They see you as an upstart, a threat to their ancient order. To maintain your throne, to prove your right to wear that crown, you cannot simply govern. You must constantly assert your dominance. The title emperor demands martial glory. It calls for victories, for expansion, for a continuous demonstration of overwhelming power. You cannot be a peacetime emperor when your legitimacy is rooted in military success and your neighbors are ceaselessly plotting your downfall. Peace, to you, risks looking like weakness, an invitation for the old powers to strike. The empire, meant to be the unshakable bedrock of French stability, becomes a self-perpetuating machine of warfare. Each victory, intended to silence your critics and secure your borders, instead alarms the continent further, driving rivals into new, desperate coalitions. The Treaty of Pressburg after Austerlitz, the Treaty of Tilsit after Friedland. These are not true ends to hostilities, but merely strategic pauses, respites before the next necessary campaign. Borders expand, yes, but so do the lines you must defend, the populations you must control, the resources you must extract. This constant state of conflict requires a relentless drain on France. Conscription becomes a way of life, pulling young men from farms and factories year after year. The treasury is perpetually stretched thin, resources diverted from domestic improvement to fuel the colossal army you need to sustain your imperial image. The stability you envisioned for France, the quiet prosperity under your firm hand, is paid for with the unending instability of war abroad. A war that consumes your finances, your manpower, and eventually your popular support. It is a tragic irony. The drive for absolute security through dominance creates absolute insecurity through constant conflict. Here is a deeper insight. The emperor is not merely a powerful ruler. He is a prisoner of the expectations placed upon the title, expectations you yourself helped to create. The First Consul could negotiate, could consolidate. The emperor must conquer, must dictate. The subtle art of diplomacy, the compromise needed for lasting peace, becomes seen as beneath your imperial dignity, a sign of weakness. You are trapped in a cycle where survival seems to demand expansion, and expansion guarantees further conflict. Ask yourself, is true stability ever found in crushing opposition and demanding submission? Or does it require the slow, difficult work of compromise, shared interest, and earned consent? Principles entirely antithetical to the imperial mindset you now embody. The machine of war you built for security becomes the very force that drains and destabilizes your realm. Proof that the greatest threats often emerge from the very actions taken to prevent them. You sought control, but the empire you forged takes on a life of its own. Driven by the insatiable logic of power and the perpetual drumbeat of war, surrounded by the gilded cages of empire, a different kind of confinement begins. The rough-and-tumble debates of the barracks, the urgent whispered strategies in tents on campaign. They are ghosts now, replaced by the stiff formalities of court. You are emperor, yes, but also you are increasingly alone. The circle of trusted advisors who once challenged you, argued tactics, pointed out logistical nightmares, they shrink or they learn silence. Talleyrand, ever the cynic, keeps his own counsel, a knowing glint in his eye you find increasingly irritating. Fouché plots, but his warnings, when they come, feel like impertinence. Your marshals are warriors, loyal perhaps, but few possess the strategic depth or the sheer audacity to question your vision. The title is no longer earned daily on the battlefield. It is inherited, absolute. Your word reshapes borders, elevates beggars to kings, and sends armies marching across continents. This unchecked power, this constant affirmation from subservient voices, begins to cultivate a dangerous flora in the mind. Infallibility. The pragmatic general, who meticulously calculated supply lines and troop movements, finds himself giving way to an emperor who believes his will is the supreme strategy. Success after success, Austerlitz, Jena, Friedland, they didn't just solidify your empire. They forged a belief in your own destiny, a destiny that no earthly force, no logistical reality, no dissenting voice could possibly deflect. This isn't just corruption. It's a unique form of intellectual isolation. The essential friction that sharpens decision-making is gone. There's no one truly holding the mirror, reflecting back potential flaws, risks, or unintended consequences. You issue decrees for the continental system, demanding sacrifices from allies and subjects alike, convinced that mere persistence, your unwavering resolve, will inevitably break Britain. You dismiss reports of widespread suffering, smuggling, and economic collapse in vassal states, not out of ignorance, but because they contradict the grand narrative of your inevitable triumph. Reality is bending to you, isn't it? Therefore, any reality that doesn't fit must be dismissed. Here lies the tragic irony. The man who owed his rise to his ruthless pragmatism and keen understanding of human nature and material limitations now finds himself increasingly divorced from both. Decisions become riskier, less grounded. Ambition isn't tempered by reality, it dictates it. The invasion of Spain, for instance, felt less like a calculated move and more like an arrogant assumption that merely replacing one Bourbon king with your brother Joseph would instantly secure the peninsula. You utterly underestimated the depth of national resistance, the brutal tenacity of guerrilla warfare. This wasn't a miscalculation of numbers. It was a failure of empathy and grounded political sense, born from the echo chamber of imperial isolation. You believed your will, your name, would suffice. It was, perhaps, the first truly self-inflicted wound on your empire, driven by a belief that you were beyond conventional challenges. Ask yourself, at what point does supreme confidence become blinding arrogance? What checks are left when you are the ultimate authority, and everyone around you depends entirely on your continued favor? The insight is stark. Without critical feedback, without grounded perspective, even the most brilliant minds can succumb to hubris. Self-awareness, the willingness to hear uncomfortable truths, is a far more potent check on power than any constitution or external force could ever hope to be. You are at the zenith of your power, yet the seeds of your downfall are sown not by your enemies, but by the unchallenged thoughts within your own mind. The emperor is all-powerful, yes, but the man is losing touch. You stand on the cobblestones of a market town far from the glittering court of Paris. The air isn't filled with cheers for the emperor, but with a quiet, heavy tension. France, the very heart of this burgeoning empire, is beginning to feel the crushing weight of glory. The endless wars, the relentless campaigns that paint the map red with French influence, demand a constant, brutal sacrifice: manpower. You see the gaps in the village square, feel the ache in the silence where young men should be joking, working, planning futures. Conscription sweeps through the nation like a scythe, pulling sons from farms, apprentices from workshops, husbands from families. The revolutionary dream of liberty feels increasingly like a cruel joke when your freedom is defined by your availability to fight and potentially die thousands of miles from home. The faces here are etched not with imperial pride, but with worry, exhaustion, and a growing resentment. This isn't just the cost in blood, it's the cost in coin and comfort. Your grand continental system, designed with strategic genius to strangle Britain economically, feels like a noose tightening around French necks too. Ports sit idle. Legitimate trade with traditional partners withers. And while smugglers grow rich in the shadows, honest merchants face ruin. Goods become scarce and expensive. Taxes rise, funding the colossal military machine and the opulent court, placing an ever heavier burden on shoulders already stooped by war and economic hardship. The promised prosperity, the bounty that the Republic, and now the Empire, was supposed to deliver, feels further away than ever for the vast majority. They fought for liberty, equality, fraternity, but live under a regime focused on dominance, hierarchy, and the relentless pursuit of one man's vision of national greatness through conquest. The stark, often overlooked reality is this: the magnificent edifice of your empire, the very foundation of your legend, rests not on the abstract ideals you once championed, but on the strained backs of ordinary Frenchmen and women. Their sweat waters the fields left unplowed. Their tears mourn the sons who won't return. Their meager savings are siphoned away to fuel campaigns they barely understand. This relentless extraction of human and economic capital is the invisible engine of your success, a chilling testament to how easily the ambitions of rulers can become a crushing burden on the ruled. It's a tragic irony. The man who rose on the tide of a revolution promising power to the people now demands their everything for his own power. Ask yourself, When does the pursuit of national glory cross the line into exploitation? What wisdom is there in studying this period other than to be profoundly wary of leaders whose magnificent visions demand such immense, disproportionate sacrifice from the many for the perceived benefit or glory of the few? The bill for imperial ambition, history shows, is always paid primarily in ordinary lives and quiet suffering. Your legions march across the continent, a vast, unstoppable tide carrying the tricolor banner, intended to sweep away the old order and establish a new one under French influence. You believe you are bringing efficiency, law, the modern administration forged in the revolutionary crucible. You genuinely think people will prefer your well-organized prefects and standardized legal codes to their patchwork of ancient customs and often corrupt local lords. You see yourself as a liberator from feudalism, a bringer of progress. Yet, as your armies settle in, as garrisons occupy foreign cities, as French becomes the language of power, something unexpected, something deeply human, begins to stir in the occupied lands. This isn't just traditional resistance, the kind driven by ousted rulers or disgruntled nobles. This is something new, something born from the friction of occupation. In the sun-baked villages of Spain, guerrilla fighters emerge from the hills, fighting not for a king they often despised, but for Spain itself, for their language, their faith, their way of life. In the fragmented German states, intellectuals and poets, sensing the shared humiliation of foreign rule, begin to speak of a common German soul, a shared history and language that transcends the petty rivalries of princes. In Italy, longing for a return to past glories takes on a new form, a desire for a unified Italy, free from both Austrian and French interference. The very act of being ruled by a foreign power forces these disparate peoples to look inward, to define themselves by what they are not French, and in doing so, discover what they are. You, Napoleon, see this primarily as banditry, as stubborn backwardness, perhaps funded by England. You miss the fundamental shift. You underestimated the deep-seated human need for belonging, for identity, for self-determination. You believed administrative competence trumped cultural autonomy. You thought loyalty could be bought with efficiency, rather than earned through shared destiny. It is a profound blind spot. You, who rose on the tide of French national fervor, failed to recognize that same powerful current in others. This is the tragic irony. The sun of the revolution, which proclaimed the rights of peoples, becomes the catalyst for nationalist movements that will ultimately challenge and erode the universalist, imperial vision he imposed. The seeds of resistance, planted by the heavy boot of occupation, bloom into the fierce, protective flower of national identity. This force is different from the armies of kings. It is diffuse, passionate, rooted in the soil and the shared stories of a people. It turns every village into a potential hotbed of rebellion, every shared meal into a quiet act of defiance, every word of their own language a political statement. It is a force that cannot be simply defeated on a battlefield. It is a tide that, once risen, is almost impossible to turn back. It teaches a stark lesson. Empires built on suppressing the collective will and identity of conquered peoples are inherently unstable. Control, however absolute it might seem at the point of a bayonet, is never truly secure when faced with the silent, simmering, unifying power of a people who decide they wish to rule themselves. Ask yourself, in your own life, where have you seen attempts to impose external control inadvertently strengthen the very identity or will it sought to suppress? What would it take for you to underestimate something as fundamental as a people's desire to be themselves? The imperial sun, so recently at its zenith, begins to cast long, ominous shadows. You stand atop your vast domain, forged in fire and ambition, only to feel the first tremors beneath your feet. The edifice, built with breathtaking speed on victories and decrees, reveals its fundamental, fatal vulnerability. It starts not with a grand army clashing, but in the dusty, treacherous hills of Spain. Spain, a nation you saw as merely another piece on the European chessboard, a place to install a compliant ruler and enforce the continental system. But Spain refuses to be moved like a pawn. It erupts in a brutal, relentless guerrilla, a little war. Not soldiers in formation, but peasants, priests, bandits, fighting from shadows, melting into the landscape. It's a war without fronts, without decisive battles, 1,000 tiny bleeding wounds. Every supply convoy is ambushed, every garrison harassed, every French soldier living in constant fear. You pour hundreds of thousands of troops, your finest marshals, immense resources, into this quagmire. It drains your treasury, bleeds your veteran ranks, and tarnishes your image of invincibility. The world watches as the Spanish ulcer festers, proving your will isn't absolute everywhere. This Spanish drain, combined with the increasing strain on the continental system, particularly Russia's reluctance to fully comply, damaging their economy and defying your authority, builds an intolerable pressure. Your pride, your strategic vision, your need to appear unchallenged, all point towards a confrontation with the Tsar. The decision is made. Russia. In 1812, you assemble the Grand Army, the largest military force Europe has ever seen. Over 600,000 men from across your empire and its dependent states. It's a breathtaking display of power, a mobile empire marching east. You are confident, believing a swift, decisive battle will bring Alexander I to heel. But Russia is not Spain, and its defense is different. It's not just soldiers, it's distance, climate, and a scorched earth policy. You push deeper and deeper, chasing an elusive victory. Supply lines stretch, then snap. Disease, hunger, and the sheer vastness of the territory begin to wear away at the edges of the mighty army. When winter descends, early and mercilessly, the retreat becomes an unimaginable horror. What marched east as a vibrant, hopeful torrent returns as a frozen, starving trickle. The Grande Armée is decimated, shattered by cold, Cossacks, and logistical collapse. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was a catastrophic unveiling. The myth of your invincibility lies frozen in the Russian snow. The sheer scale of the disaster exposes the fundamental fragility of your empire. It was built on conquest and personal loyalty, a vast, imposing structure, lacking the deep institutional roots or the broad popular consent that anchored older monarchies or emerging nation-states. It was a pyramid balanced on its apex, dependent entirely on your genius, your energy, your continuous success. Here is the stark reality, the profound, almost tragic insight. Empires built primarily on rapid military expansion and the force of a single personality, no matter how brilliant, are inherently fragile. They lack resilience. They have no deep well of shared national identity or ingrained administrative structures to draw upon when the tide turns. A single major failure, Spain draining the core, Russia delivering the knockout blow, can trigger a chain reaction of collapse. Ask yourself, was the decision to push into Russia a necessary gamble born of circumstance, or the ultimate act of hubris from a man who believed his will could conquer even geography and winter? What would you have done, feeling the mounting pressure from all sides, the weight of an empire demanding continuous success? The reflection is universal. Grand structures, whether empires, fortunes, or even personal reputations, built on shaky foundations, on transient success, on personality culto, on unsustainable growth, are destined to crumble. True strength isn't just imposing scale. It comes from resilience, adaptability, deep-rooted support, and a foundation that can weather the inevitable storms. The cracks that appear in Spain, the collapse in Russia, they show the fatal flaw wasn't external. It was structural, inherent in the very way the imperial edifice was constructed. The empire, which seemed so solid just years after the coronation, now stands revealed as a magnificent but ultimately temporary stage set. You lost it all. Exile on Elba, a brief, audacious return like a caged eagle breaking free, the final crushing defeat at Waterloo, and then the lonely rock of St. Helena, a prison etched in stone and sea. The empire you built, piece by agonizing piece, on the raw foundation of your own relentless will, and crowned not by divine right, but by your own hand, dissolved within a few short years. The kings you installed, your brothers and marshals, were overthrown, their ephemeral thrones collapsing like sandcastles. The territories you annexed, carved out of ancient kingdoms and republics, were reclaimed, the map of Europe struggling to reset itself. The title you seized, Emperor of the French, was stripped away, leaving only the military rank, a ghost of the power it once commanded. Yet the coronation, the imperial years, left an indelible mark, deeper than any treaty or battlefield boundary. You demonstrated undeniably and violently that a man of sheer talent, not birth, could ascend to the absolute pinnacle of power, challenging the very concept of inherited right that had governed Europe for centuries. You spread French law, the Code Napoleon, like a revolutionary seed, rationalizing administration, civil rights, and property laws across vast swathes of the continent. Reforms that outlived your reign and influenced legal systems for generations. You redrew the map and governance of Europe in ways that proved impossible to fully erase, consolidating states, destroying the old Holy Roman Empire, and sowing the seeds of future nationalisms. But this monumental creation came at a terrible price. You also left a legacy of endless war, a generation lost to battlefields from the pyramids to Moscow, millions dead across the continent, and a France exhausted, its demographic and economic strength sapped. This is the tragic irony. The pursuit of empire, even when seemingly driven by perceived genius, efficiency, and a desperate desire for lasting impact and glory, often leaves behind not permanence, but a mixed and bloody legacy. It achieves some revolutionary goals while simultaneously causing immense suffering, ultimately failing to secure the absolute control or lasting dynastic glory its architect envisioned. The empire built by ambition alone proved as fleeting as a dream upon waking. The insight here is profound. The lessons of history are rarely simple, neat, or purely moral. Ambition, perhaps the most potent force in human affairs, can indeed drive incredible achievement, shatter old paradigms, and forge new realities. But simultaneously, it can unleash terrible destruction, unimaginable suffering, and leave behind a trail of devastation. Ask yourself, was the scale of the suffering inherent in the scale of the ambition? The consequences of the forces you unleashed, the pursuit of power and dominance, echoed for generations, often far beyond your ultimate control or initial intent. The rise of nationalism you inadvertently fostered would reshape the 20th century in ways you could never have predicted from St. Helena. It is a stark reminder that setting vast forces in motion is far easier than guiding their final destination. You sit on St. Helena, the vast, indifferent ocean, your final, inescapable boundary. The wind carries no echoes of the Grande Armée, only the mournful cry of seabirds. From this desolate rock, you look back across the tumultuous seas of your life, and the crown you placed on your own head looms largest in the memory. It felt at the time like destiny made manifest, the logical, inevitable culmination of your relentless rise. It was meant to signify permanence, legitimacy beyond that of mere politicians, a new era defined by your singular genius. You believed you were installing yourself, not just as ruler, but as the anchor of a new, unshakable order. Yet, with the chilling clarity of exile, he sees now that the coronation marked not the zenith, but the beginning of the end. It was the point where unchecked ambition, symbolized by that golden weight, and the impossible demands of an emperor's title began their slow, inevitable work of dismantling everything he had achieved as consul. The drive for that ultimate symbol of power led him to embrace the very structures he once overthrew, trapping him in a cycle of endless war and unsustainable expansion that could only end in exhaustion and defeat. What was the true lesson of that cold December day in Notre Dame? Perhaps that the most formidable opponent isn't an army or a coalition, but the simple, brutal limits of reality itself. The point where even the most extraordinary will buckles under the weight of impossible demands and overstretched resources. He sits and wonders, what if he had remained consul, consolidating gains, building peacefully? History offers no such comforting parallel timeline, only the stark reality of the path taken, a path paved with victories that ultimately led here. His story, from the revolutionary general who promised liberty, to the self-crowned emperor who wielded absolute power, to the lonely exile staring at the horizon, is a timeless epic about the intoxicating allure of supreme power and the devastating cost of believing you are somehow above the forces that govern ordinary men and nations. He sought to command history, to bend its arc to his will. But in the end, history judged him, sealing his fate on this remote, forgotten island. He reflects on the irony, quoting himself perhaps, "From the sublime to the ridiculous is but a step." The coronation was sublime in its sheer audacity. St. Helena, perhaps, the ridiculous, tragic conclusion to an ambition that dared to crown itself, only to find that true, lasting legitimacy is something earned from the world, not merely taken by force or declaration. He knows, with a certainty born of profound loss, that his story serves as a chilling reminder for any who might come after, another equally ambitious soul who believes they too can defy the natural order, crown themselves metaphorically or literally, and build an empire solely on the strength of their own will. His exile is the silent testament to the forces they would unleash, the blood that would be shed, and the likely solitude that awaits at the end of such a path. The ultimate power fantasy, ending here, powerless on a rock in the sea. The great empires he conquered crumbled. The dynasties he overthrew returned. The very order he sought to impose vanished like smoke. His legacy, for all its indelible mark on the world, carries a profound, tragic lesson. It wasn't just armies or coalitions that brought him down. It was the internal enemy, the boundless ambition that refused to acknowledge limits, the belief that the rules of reality did not apply to him. When we study history honestly, stripping away the myths and the glory, we find not just battles and dates, but potent wisdom about human nature, about the seductive poison of unchecked power. We see the forces unleashed when one person believes they are exceptional enough to defy gravity, to reshape the world solely through sheer will. Napoleon's final reflection is not about military strategy, but about the soul's capacity for overreach and the universe's quiet insistence on balance. In the end, it wasn't the battlefield that defeated him. It was believing he couldn't lose to the limits of reality itself.